Right, hello, greetings. It's Thomas Daffern here. Welcome to everyone if you're watching this. As you know, I do a weekly broadcast, really. It's a kind of sermon, philosophical summary of world events from a spiritual, metaphysical and psychological perspective. You know, we're living through such strange times. That's why I started doing this work. And as someone who's always believed in the power of rationality and the power of truth, you know, I've dedicated my life to philosophy, to scholarship, to education, to teaching, and you know, that's my medium, that's my métier, so that's why I'm sharing this. This is like my weekly lecture, I suppose, or sermon. When I lived at the Castle of the Musings in Scotland for 7 years, we occasionally had sermons in the chapel. And we are living through some very odd times. I think everyone will agree with that. So that's what I want to start off with really today. I want to talk about, you know, what I'm, the more I'm reading and studying and trying to think about the world situation, every direction you travel in leads to an imponderable or an unknown. It seems to me we're living in a series of epistemological vacuums. And I'm going to list some of the things that I've come up against. You'll have your own list. This is unprecedented. I think the concept of education becomes tricky when so many things are unknown, if not unknowable. When I started out as a young scholar, as I say, starting out as a philosophy student, wanting to find truth, wanting to find what is real, what is knowledge, and so on, devoting my life to that, and using a variety of historical and philosophical methodologies to do that. You know, I never for one second thought that we'd end up in a world situation where we're in this epistemological contest for what is knowable and what is, you know, everything that can be known is now a matter of dispute and digitized warfare. This is a totally unprecedented situation. I mean, the internet I welcomed when it was first developed, watched it. I was one of the first people in the UK to use it from the Institute of Education, when we were still using a thing called Janet, an academics-only type of network among university departments. We could send emails to each other, and I, you know, did so with gusto, and I was then developing the Institute of Peace Studies, so it was a useful tool. And then it left the university, people started setting up websites, and you know, I thought, well, this is jolly good, it'll foster communication, it'll get people talking and foster a sense of community. But what I didn't realise is that, you know, malevolent forces can use this for disinformation and inverting truth, and for the weaponisation of information, you know, in cyber warfare, effectively, knowledge warfare, whatever you want to call it. And there are actually people in armed forces that are paid to do that, and in so-called intelligence services. I mean, this is what I find so scandalous. I mean, criminal gangs, yes, okay, you know, criminal gangs will always find ways to extract profit, ill-gotten gains off genuine things. I mean, it's like the highwaymen will stop the carriage and steal the money. So with emails and the internet, they will stop them, try and filter them and scam them. But the intelligence services worldwide are supposed to be countervailing this and operating against it. Now, that's, you know, but I don't think they have been very successful. And I think they've let these cyber giants, Google, Facebook and all the others, get to such a sort of transnational commanding position that it's required the work of Shoshana Zuboff to highlight this, and also Chris Wiley and others. We have to see this internet transformed into a tool of peace, rationality, ethics, spirituality, and truth. And we can't equivocate on that. You know, there's no sort of equivocation possible between deliberate misinformation leading to chaos, mayhem, and violence, and truth discourse, hopefully leading to peace. You know, you can't, it's an either or here. And the problem with the profit incentive structure built into these internet giants is that they, in a sense, they don't care. As long as you're clicking, you might be a white racist, neo-Nazi who wants to burn everyone with, different colour skin. But as long as you're clicking away and buying stuff, they privilege you. Now that's wrong. That's just stupid. It's not just wrong, it's stupid. And it's like undoing 2,500 years of cultural and intellectual evolution. I would say abolish the thing if that's the best we can do. There need to be parliamentary and Congress oversight and ethicists like me, ethical philosophers. We have to speak up about this. Fortunately, people are, and finally the message is trickling through. So I'll come back to that later. What I want to start off with is my list of things I don't know, and I'm going to be absolutely honest and truthful in this. That's the point of these discourses. And I'd love you to, reflect on this, because it's a very weird situation we find ourselves in. We have such a plethora of information. We have 24/7 access to the world's media, and yet fundamental core things in our reality and our world are now unknown. Very odd. Okay, so my little list, I just put this together. It's not in chronological order or importance, but these are things I don't know, and they really frustrate me because I'm a historian dedicated to finding out truth, and a philosopher, ditto. Okay, so, well, one of the things I don't know, and it annoys me, is the origins of World War I. Now, when I was a young student at the University of London studying the subject, I sat under the feet of many great historians active then. I was studying in the 1980s. I was working in international history at the LSE Department of International History, which is world famous. Going to lectures at Senate House in the university in Russell Square. And, fascinated. And the general consensus we were taught was that it was Germany's fault. It was mainly the Kaiser's fault, personally, psychologically. And yes, there were other factors, and of course it was all very complex, but on the whole it was Germany's fault. And the British were, unwilling, reluctant latecomers doing a good job, saving the world from, Prussian military autocracy. So that was the sort of truth, quote unquote, that the professors of history by and large concurred with. There are a few dissenting voices, but strange enough we never heard from them. We never got lectures from them. There were myriads of resources we were taught to use, Foreign Office papers, telegrams that were exchanged. We had to study all the stuff in forensic detail, looking at the sources, the evidence. We looked at letters made by diplomats at the time, records of diaries, and there was Edward Grey, who was the foreign minister in Britain, who reluctantly agreed to mobilise the troops and go to war. There was the King, and their equivalents in all other countries. So we looked at the role of the diplomatic service in Germany, in Austria-Hungary, in France, in Russia, and so on. So anyway, that was what we were taught. That was the truth, right? But lo and behold, then, since then, I've stumbled on some new research that was published by two Scottish historians, which makes me unable to sleep some nights. Because what that book has revealed, and, it raises so many questions that it deserves proper attention, is that actually the war was deliberately engineered from London by financial interests that wanted to transform what was a very small little struggle taking place in the Balkans into a worldwide conflagration in order to do down Germany. The thinking in London, in financial circles, was Germany's getting too powerful. She has to be crushed. So let's use this spat starting off in the Balkans to hype this conflict up, and let's launch a world war against Germany and the Axis powers, the central power of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And let's kind of pretend we're acting righteously, but actually, we're not going to accept any sort of peace overtures. We're going to go for the jugular as much as possible. Now, this is extremely worrying, and I'm speaking as a historian. I wish my colleagues at the Institute of Historical Research would have a seminar discuss this with the authors of the book. And history is based on evidence. Now, they've presented some quite compelling evidence. The argument they've constructed historically shows that, yes, there were forces in London and in an international network coming out of London, connected with finance, with the arms industry, with military concerns, with what you could call the imperial concerns of the day of Britain, 1913, 1914, who deliberately wanted to make it a much worse fight than it was. And so that evidence is really shocking to me. I mean, it undoes all the faith that I was taught as a young undergraduate that, the war was unstoppable, it was crazy Europeans, it was the Germans, it was the Kaiser. We only came in last and late because, well, God, we were good, folks coming to the defence of Belgium. And reluctantly we went to war and sent our brave lads over there. But hang on, if what this Scottish historian team is saying is true, then that's false. That was the propaganda that was published at the time. The other thing the historians reveal is there was a vast amount of anti-German propaganda in the British press, in the Times, in the other papers, in the months and years leading up to the outbreak of World War I. And they identify who was writing these articles, why, who was editing the newspapers. And again, there was a concerted effort by the British intelligentsia in the media to demonise Germany. And some of it was totally false. It was propaganda. So, anyway, now, which is true? Which of the stories is true? The one I was taught as an undergraduate, the more recent evidence that's come forward, discuss. It would require me to go for a year and study at the Institute of Historical Research, get all the data, interview 100 leading historians, research all the latest articles, journals, historical research on the origins of World War I, which is a huge issue. It would require going to Russia, looking at evidence in St. Petersburg, in Germany, in Berlin, going to the sources of all the Foreign Office archives, and then interviewing people in London. That would be at least a year's project, to do all that. But in the meantime, I don't know. I think that's an incredibly important research project, and somebody ought to do it. I'd be very happy to, correspond with some historians that want to take that on. And if Scotland gets independence, I think these two historians should try and get some funding for that research, because, it would be very interesting. Okay, that's just the first thing I don't know, and it's really annoying because, of course, so much followed from World War I. The whole history of Britain as the goodies of history, which I was brought up with, saluting the flag, the Queen, believing in the British way of life, truth, honour, justice, fairness, etc., was premised on that concept that World War I was a righteous struggle that we had to do to get the job done. And from that came World War II. The messy way that peace was made at the end of World War I was scandalous, actually. World War I was an utter catastrophe. I nursed Canadian soldiers from that combat. I have a direct link to people that fought and died in World War I. And I was sent back to Britain to study, by an old Scottish soldier who said, go back and find out why on earth we were killing each other in the trenches. So, yeah, it's a big issue for me. And World War II came out of it. most of the people that fought in World War II at the top level all fought in World War One. You know, Rommel, Hitler, all these later characters that appear were all, you know, revved up into action by World War One. If World War One hadn't have happened, there would not have been a World War Two. It's absolutely simple. We could have jumped. Just imagine they'd resolved that, you know, that sort of international rivalry that was going on in Europe at that time peacefully. Imagine that there'd been a mediation service to resolve that, such as I've proposed the European Union create. So imagine they'd done that, then we would have leapfrogged to something like the League of Nations or, you know, the European Union without 20 million people having to kill each other in World War One, and then countless more in World War Two, and the Holocaust, and, you know, the madness of racism and nationalism that World War One and World War Two stoked up to, you know, fever pitch. And also, you know, for good and ill, but the ills of the Bolshevik Revolution wouldn't have happened. You know, Russia could have gradually converted to socialism and a progressive way of life. They could have gradually grown out of their feudal autocracy of Tsarism and moved to a social democratic sort of society, but without the bayonet, without Lenin, without the horrors of the Gulag that Solzhenitsyn documented. And it would have made socialism a much more attractive, you know, project, as it was to intellectuals like my friend Pierre Leroux, the great French intellectual who was mayor of Boussac, my local town here. And he was the first French intellectual to talk about socialism and analyse it in depth in the 1830s. I'll come back to him a bit later. So the catastrophes that followed from World War One would all have been avoided. We would have had something like a European Union, a federation or something, as Kant wanted, in 1915, instead of the horrors of the war. Now, okay, so, yeah. So that's what I don't know, is how could we have stopped that? I know that if I'd have been alive then, I would have been working tirelessly to stop it. Many people in the peace movement were. There were women particularly organised, there were boats for peace, there were voices against the war on all sides, and some countries stayed out. The Netherlands stayed out, they didn't want to get involved. Norway stayed out, Sweden stayed out, and, you know, Switzerland stayed out. I mean, sensibly, they just said, no, this war thing is not for us. I think Denmark was neutral as well. It was just the British and the Germans and the French and the Russians all got sucked into this maelstrom of ignorance. But what concerns me, and the thing I don't know and really, really want to know, is, was that deliberate? Was there a, you know, yeah, as these Scottish authors allege? Because if so, that raises huge ethical questions for the study of history. And I just want to say one thing on the Kaiser's culpability, which is that latest evidence has come. There's a wonderful philosopher chap in Britain who's written a book called The Moral History of the 20th Century. And he points out from evidence that the Kaiser wasn't convinced about the need for this war right up to the end. He'd been trying to make peace, he'd been trying to send out peace feelers. He was in touch directly with the Tsar, Nicholas II, through private, you know, mediators. He was trying to get a sort of non-violence treaty signed with Russia immediately. This is in the months leading up to the outbreak of the war. I mean, obviously the assassination of the Archduke in Sarajevo was terrible, but the Kaiser was trying to prevent it spreading. And that's why he was reaching out with peace feelers. However, the allegation of the Scottish authors is that the foreign minister of Russia was working against him deliberately and was in the pay of British intelligence. What? I mean, that's shocking, right? But that's their allegation. And to the extent that that foreign minister arrested the personal envoy of the Tsar, who was about to set off from a station in St. Petersburg to go and sign a peace treaty with the Tsar, with the Kaiser direct. I mean, you know. And this foreign minister took it upon himself to have this guy hauled off the train, knowing what he was going to do. So, in a sense, he was doing a coup against the government, against the Tsar, who wanted peace, as did the Kaiser. Okay, these are facts that can be validated or not by historical research. That's why we study history. That's why historians are paid to do their forensic, detailed study. And I'd love to work with Russian, German, and British historians. I mean, I do run Historians for Peace. I set it up back in the 80s, and looks like we still have work to do. You know, peace hasn't come yet. I mean, look at what's going on in Myanmar or Burma with these killings. I mean, we need a historical peace team to go there and try and talk some sense into these military coup artists who think that shooting innocent men, women and children and babies is the way to bring peace to a nation. Okay, right, so now, another thing I don't know. Okay, well, fast forward, and, you know, I don't think I'm alone in this, but I don't know, actually, who was responsible for the tragedies on 9/11 in New York and Washington. I don't know who masterminded that entire sequence of events. I don't know if it was bin Laden from a cave in Iraq, in Afghanistan, with, you know, 17 so-called terrorist, you know, activists, as the official narrative of the Bush Commission found out. You know, I don't know that that narrative is sufficiently credible to be believed in. And that's why I wrote a 2-volume, 1,000-page book about it last year, which I published. And I expressed, you know, all the things we don't know about it. And it's not just me personally not knowing, it's the international academic, scientific, historical community. These are things we don't know. I listed them all, you know. We don't know why there's so much anomalous data about who was on the planes, where they took off from, you know, the manifests have not been revealed. We don't know how come a passport of one of these so-called terrorists miraculously survived the collapse of an entire building and the conflagration involved, turns up on the pavement in New York, you know. I mean, there's so many things we don't know from that sequence of events. We also don't know why Ahmed Shah Massoud was killed 2 days before 9/11 in Afghanistan by unnamed, unknown assailants, because obviously they were connected with that attack. Whoever, you see, Ahmed Shah Massoud was a great man. I met his brother when he was Afghan ambassador to London. These were very good, learned, intelligent Muslims. Ahmed Shah Massoud had gone to the French-speaking school in Kabul. He was a moderate, liberal, intelligent, intellectual Muslim, like my mentor and colleague, Dr. Zaki Badawi. You know, I'm sure Badawi knew Massoud. And some of my students at the university at the Muslim College in London, where I taught for 2 years, were friends of Massoud, introduced me to his brother and so on. Now, so this man was a great man, and yet he was assassinated 2 days before 9/11. You know, why? And who by? And so I've set up a truth commission, a historical inquiry commission into 9/11. We met last year for the first time. We'll meet every year on 9/11 each year until we find the truth. And one of the historians who testified at that, a Canadian historian who's written about all this, focused his paper on the Ahmed Shah Massoud killing and says this is the key to unravelling the whole of 9/11, because if we can find out, you know, who was behind that, and the implication is that someone from Western intelligence was working with people in the Taliban to somehow bring this man down, whichever forces were involved. And names are named, you know, Peter has done some very detailed homework on this, and you know, it's published on his website and so on. You can contact me for details, but we'll be looking at this again on 9/11 this year. And so it's a whole bunch of unknowns. Now, you know, this really irritates me. This is like 20 years ago. And we still don't know. I think the important thing to do as intellectuals and historians and philosophers is to use our not knowing creatively. Out of the not knowing comes eventually avenues and paths to get towards knowing. And I'm a Socratic philosopher. I follow in the lineage of Socrates, and he said it's really, really important to be clear about what we don't know. Because, thinking you know something and not actually knowing it is very, very dangerous. It's very foolish. I mean, if I pretend to be a nuclear scientist, walk into a French nuclear, energy station and pretend I know what I'm doing, I'm going to blow the thing up. And that's extremely dangerous. And so we have politicians, apparatchiks at all levels of society that pretend they know stuff and look at the state of the world. Someone like Donald Trump, the fact that someone of that degree of not knowing could have got into power. But the thing about him is he never once admitted what he didn't know. And that's the problem with Boris Johnson, same type. They're so arrogant over their very ignorance, which is a problem. So anyway, that's the second thing I don't know. Let me go on to a third one. Okay, so will Scotland leave the UK over Brexit? I don't know. I think it's very likely. I think the mood in Scotland, from my experience of living there for 7 years, from all my dear friends that still live there, from the centuries of Scottish resentment about, in a sense, being controlled from Westminster and Windsor, that resentment has bubbled up in the last decades, and this whole Brexit catastrophe has done vast amounts to bring it to the boil. So will it succeed? Will they get independence from the UK? I don't know. It's an imponderable. I think a lot of people are going to try very hard. Okay, another spin-off from that question that I don't know is what role, if any, did British intelligence play, or some other intelligence service, in fostering discord between the two leading figures of the Scottish national movement, Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon? It's a really weird plot line that suddenly Alex Salmond's going off setting up a new independence party and Nicola Sturgeon sticking with the SNP. It looks like a sort of a diabolism. Now, the word the devil, or diabolus, means to throw something across the path. Diabolus was suddenly something crosses the path at the wrong angle and knocks you off. And that's sort of what's happened here. So I believe that Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond have both acted in their way, thinking they're acting honourably. And they've both been cleared by legal inquiries. So there's no reason why they shouldn't have shook hands and made up and worked together for a successful victory in the coming May elections, and then called a second referendum. That would have been the optimal. But no, Alex Salmond has been so fired up, he's like a sort of one of those Subbuteo figures that you used to play with as a kid. I don't know if you know, the little footballers on round, concave type of bases that would wobble a lot and then roam around the pitch. How has that happened? Well, my speculation is, and again I don't know, that someone high up in British intelligence, somewhere along the line, back in the May era probably, devised this plot to weaken Scottish nationalism by bringing these character accusations against Salmond. And what better way to do that than help people manufacture a whole bunch of sexual impropriety allegations? It's the one thing that's designed to bring down somebody. And it's so easy to manufacture. I mean, it was done with Julian Assange. It's been done with other people. You name them. And it looks to me that that was an operation coming from the same kind of stable that did the ones against Assange. That was American-British collaboration. And that's why he's still in jail, Well, that's shocking, but I don't know the details. I can't join up the details, I mean, as a historian, I ought to be able to go into the Foreign Office and say, look, show me your, files on this case, please. But nobody has oversight, no scholars under the 30-year rule. We don't get to see these things. And then, even then, they're redacted. So, people in 30 years' time may read, yes, that thing against Salmon, that was all manufactured. Well, I don't want to live in a world of such unknowns. I think that's a misuse of state power. I mean, I think personally that intelligence services operating against its own citizens, it should absolutely be ruled out of order. I mean, it's totally a misuse of state power. Under any circumstances. That's what Stalin did, that's what Hitler did, that's what totalitarian regimes do. In democracies, it's not supposed to work like that. I've told you before, if you've been paying attention, that the Spartans did this kind of thing. The Spartans ran a secret intelligence service called the Cryptia, which did spy on its own citizens and ruled Sparta with a rod of iron. The Nazis, the totalitarian view of history, thinks that's a good idea. That's how to keep people in order. I don't agree with that. I don't want to live in a Europe or a Britain that is premised on the Cryptia. I believe with Pericles in a democracy of spiritual aspiration and intellectual quality that we should, self-police our own morality. That's the point of democracy, and feel our way towards the good, towards the right, in love, and not in fear, through motivation towards truth, not hatred or any of that stuff. Okay, so that's an important question though. What I'd love to work with historians and get on finding that out, because I think this man Alex Salmon has been wronged, if it's true that that is the case, and I think the Scottish government, Nicola Stonehenge, should set up an inquiry into that. That would help heal their relationship. I don't believe for 1 second that she would have been involved in that, but she might have enabled it to happen without even realising it. Maybe there are people on her staff or somehow have penetrated the Scottish office who are acting at that level of duplicity and irregularity, which should be exposed. I mean, the problem with Scotland at the moment is there are two governments. There's Nicola Sturgeon, the official government, and then there's the Scottish office run from Westminster, which does what it wants. It's not a situation that is particularly conducive to anything other than conflict. So that's another thing I don't know, is who is behind this. I think and believe that the majority of Scots, the majority of people that have thought it through, will avoid the temptation of voting for the wounded bear, Alex Salmon, although he's an interesting character. And he'll get some sympathy vote. But I think the majority will stick with the SNP, and I think they will win this next election by a hands, a huge majority, which will lead to an unstoppable force for independence. But I don't know that. Okay, what else don't I know? Gosh, where to begin? So